Abner Mares is a world champion boxer, Olympian, sports commentator, and most importantly, dad to two little girls. Beloved by abuelas and hardcore fans alike, Abner is a pro at entertaining the world both in and out of the ring. On Blue Wire's new podcast, On the Hook with Abner Mares, we'll hear from Abner, his family, fellow athletes, and other people who made him the boxer and the man he is today. They chat about topics like the state of boxing, Abner's journey from a kid on the streets to boxing champion, sports, music, culture, family life, and so much more. Listen to On the Hook with Abner Mares wherever you get your podcasts. Episodes in English are out on Tuesdays, and episodes in Spanish are out on Wednesdays. What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you once more without my fantastic co-host, Adam Frommel. I am, however, in just a moment, going to be joined by Kristian Winfield of the New York Daily News. Follow him on Twitter at Krisplash. That's at KRISPLASHED. He does a fantastic job covering the Brooklyn Nets and the NBA at large for the Daily News. As you might have guessed, if you did not already read the title, this is going to be the Brooklyn Nets Lookahead podcast. However, we do delve into more of a national scale topic at the beginning that I think is fascinating. I asked Kristian about the NBA's head coach hiring practices, and we tackle that just from all sorts of angles. There's clearly the racial disparity when you're looking at the number of white head coaches and even executives there are compared to black people and just people of color in general. And then we use that to talk about the Steve Nash hire, where maybe it's not even an issue of him skipping the line. It could be. We get into that. But it's the opportunity that he's getting to kind of take over a ready-made contender as a rookie, where would every other rookie head coach have that opportunity? So that's a form of privilege for him as well. Kristian had some great thoughts on that. I really enjoyed talking to him about them. But then we get into all things Nets. And even if you're not a Nets fan, this podcast is so interesting because we talk about trade targets and free agents galore. The Nets they have a trade package in waiting. Are they going to go after Bradley Beal, Victor Oladipo, Jrue Holiday? We talk about Aaron Gordon a little bit. We're suggesting free agency targets. We're talking about Kevin Durant's return, how he looks post-injury, the fit between Kyrie Irving, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Caris LeVert, assuming that not one of them is traded. We talk Jarrett Allen. This is all things Nets, but it's a great podcast for all of you. I hope you listen to it, enjoy it. Before we get there, though, just want to shout out our sponsors, BetOnline and Indeed. Without them, this podcast would not be possible. And last, but certainly not least, please, pretty please with sugar on top, continue rating and reviewing and subscribing to us wherever you are consuming your podcasts. Even if you're not using iTunes, though, that is still the best place to help us out, to let us know that you're out there, that you're listening, and that I am not always, at least, yelling into the great void. So just head over to iTunes, search Hardwood Knocks, 5-star rating, write a review. We really, really appreciate the reviews, even if they have constructive criticism. We are always reading them. And look, wherever you're getting your podcast, just make sure you're subscribed and downloading all our episodes. That's the next best way to help us. And then this is actually my final note. Follow us on social media at Hardwood Knocks, and also our YouTube channel where our podcasts are, youtube.com, search Hardwood Knocks. We will be right there. I have delayed long enough with this primer. Let's now get into a bunch of different things with the New York Daily News' Kristian Winfield. Kristian, welcome back to the podcast. I think this is the fourth time I've had you on, so thank you for being a frequent guest of the podcast now. Yeah, I think this is number 4.
I need some stock, man. What's up? I need some shares. I need whatever you want to call it. You can give me shares. You give me some Bitcoin. You know what I'm saying? However you want to compensate, I'll take it. But thanks for having me.
You will be the lone stakeholder in this podcast, then. So
let's do it. You know, if I'm the lone stakeholder, that means I'm the lone beneficiary of whatever coins get paid out. So I'll take them.
How are you doing, though? You know, we're post-bubble now. This is like we're in the offseason. We're waiting to see. We know when the draft's going to happen, but we're waiting for the moratorium to lift. We still don't have an exact date on free agency. We just know it's going to start sometime before or around December 1st. So how are you during this, like, I guess, time of, for us, like, aside from the breaking news, it's just sort of a standstill in this wait-and-see mode?
Yeah, it's downtime. You know, right now it'd be around the season opener, right? What is this? October 20th, 21st?
Yeah.
Today? Yeah, 21st. We'd be at game 2 or so of the season, right? I'd probably be at Barclays, up in section 115, watching some basketball. I feel like my clock hasn't, my actual inner clock has reset, but the real world has not reset yet. So I'm just sitting here. But no, I'm good. I've moved into a new apartment. I'm in Brooklyn. I'm just trying to, we're bracing for the weather to break. I know it hasn't necessarily tanked yet, but soon it's going to tank. And the election is around the corner too, so I'm getting ready for that. Other than that, man, I'm just trying to keep up with what's going on in the league. Talk to who I've got to talk to. Keep some content going for the daily news, and just try to have some fun if possible.
I will say the one, and I am crossing my fingers, doing anything I can to hope that the election turns out the way that it needs to turn out. But the thing that's still catching me off guard is I don't think my clock is actually reset because I think the LeBron James conversation is what got me, where they were like, he's going to turn 36 in a few weeks, and it's like, oh crap, this is we're close to December when LeBron's going to turn 36, and so that whole schedule flip has definitely thrown me off more than I realized.
Right. I mean, shoot, my birthday's in a week. What's today? 20. Yeah, my birthday's on the 28th. So I've got to
Happy
figure
early
out what the hell I'm
birthday.
going to do. Right. Thank you. Yeah, you officially are the first person to wish me happy birthday. How does it feel? Wow, this is an honor.
Um,
Oh my
it
goodness.
feels amazing for me. I mean, I wish it was coming under better circumstances. I just feel like what is time at this point? Just lost track of time.
Right.
Like I don't even know how people. I haven't had a birthday yet during the pandemic. But I celebrated one with my wife. It was her 30th, and I can objectively say that it was like mildly depressing.
Wow. Yeah, I just can't really do anything. I don't know. I feel like we're still gonna probably have a couple folks over and make some food, play some music, get on our neighbors' nerves. That's
I'm
about it. I
all
don't
for the
think I'm gonna do
latter.
too much this time around. Right.
I wanted to start with the Nets conversation, the Steve Nash hire, which is the biggest change that I think they've incurred since we last actually spoke about the Nets.
Sure.
And so when the news first broke, we're talking about this now, like I don't even know how many weeks after the fact. Was that
Jeez.
something like that decision? Was that something that caught you off guard? Because it seldom seems like these decisions actually come as a surprise to people who are really plugged in. But this also felt like one of those times where even those people were like, "Oh crap! Wow."
No, let me tell you something. The way the Nets operate, it's no one saw Kenny Atkinson's firing coming or whatever you want to call it, dismissal, mutually agreed parting of ways. No one saw that coming. The day before the news broke, the Nets had a game, and Kenny Atkinson. I didn't really. I probably was talking about it to you the last time I was on the podcast, but we didn't really put it together at the time. Kenny Atkinson was in a rush. He was ready. The Nets had just beaten, I believe, the Spurs. And I think they had lost maybe 2 in a row or something like that. They had lost. I don't think it was a crazy losing streak. It might have been 3 or so in a row. And they had beaten the Spurs. Caris had a great game. And Kenny Atkinson's in a rush. He takes about 3 or 4 questions. He goes, "Guys, I got to go." And then we find out the next day that Kenny Atkinson is no longer the head coach. So that just gives you a little bit of backdrop. The Nets are generally a keep things on the hush organization.
Yep.
I'm a guy who I'm running around trying to talk to team nutritionists about what they're feeding the players and why they're feeding the players, and they're not even trying to give me information about that, talking about it's proprietary information, and they don't want to give other teams any ideas into what they're feeding their players. So I get that. And I get and to answer your question, I didn't see the Steve Nash hire coming. A lot of the reporters that I was talking to, they didn't see the Steve Nash hire coming either. So it kind of just like snuck up on us in the middle of, I forget when. I think it just like broke as soon as we woke up in the morning. Steve Nash is the new Nets head coach. Yeah. To answer your question, I didn't see it coming. I had a list of names who I thought would probably be a good candidate. The conversation about black head coaches that were qualified for the job. We've already had that conversation multiple times. We've had Mark Jackson. We got a bunch of different names, Tyronn Lue, a bunch of different guys who would have been, even some new ones, Alvin Gentry, Nate McMillan, those guys probably would have been qualified as well. But when you talk about Steve Nash, and there's two sets, and this is something that I've also come around on. Obviously there are our black head coaches who have extensive coaching experience in the league, have been coaching for decades. And then there's the actual NBA player, MVP, two-time MVP, who plays the position most like the head coach, who never actually was a head coach, but always wanted to. I understand that, if you were a player in this league, you should have your pick of, or at least your preference of what you want to do, and not necessarily get moved to the front of the line like what happened with Steve Nash. But more so, okay, well, I played this game at a very high level. For example, if
Right.
Chauncey Billups wanted to be the GM of the Pistons, I'm sure that job would open up for him in a heartbeat. Why? He has no GM experience, but he played this game at a very high level. He's demonstrated his thought process on TV. We know exactly. That's like saying if Kevin Garnett wanted to be the GM or have some type of role in the Timberwolves, he's a Hall of Fame basketball player who's won championship. So I kind of understand it, but at the same time, it was just a little bit disappointing when you've got a team or a franchise that says Black Lives Matter. You've got players who are wearing Black Lives Matter in the Orlando bubble. You've got a player who say he's ready to risk it all and give all of his money back and give all of his accolades and accomplishments back if it means Black liberation. And then you sign off on a head coach who is not Black, but at the end of the day, if this is the guy who the players feel and who the organization feels is going to take them to the next level, then so be it. But I will tell you this: if they do not get a championship in the next couple years, then you have to revisit that question because Steve Nash, and I'm going on a tangent here, and it's fine. I always go over when I'm talking with you, but it's not necessarily the job, right? It's not the fact that Steve Nash got a head coaching job before other qualified Black candidates. It's Steve Nash got Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Caris, LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, DeAndre Jordan, Jarrett Allen, and he got dealt a perfect hand as opposed to a coach of color who will probably have to come in this league and take the Kings job or take another job or take a New York Knicks job, right? Well, that ended up going to Tom Thibodeau. It's a discrepancy in the quality of opportunity that's provided to Black head coaches as opposed to others that is particularly disturbing. But at the same time, if this is, and now it's another part of the conversation. This was why I can't wait for press conferences and for player availability to open up, because we need to know if this was a signing that or a hiring that was made by Nets management, Nets ownership, or if it was a hiring that was gone after by players, right? Because players can't say, "Hey, we want more Black head coaches in this league," and then not use their power to do so, right? So once that's something that I'm going to be asking once Kyrie and KD are able to actually speak for themselves in a public forum, and not, what I'm saying, like I hate the whole Kyrie went and spoke to somebody on some podcast. Let me go write what he said. That's not really. I don't necessarily like doing that. I'd rather talk to somebody directly about something. But these guys have to speak for themselves. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. If you think Steve Nash is the guy for the job, that's fine. But if you also think that there is an issue with the number of Black head coaches in this league and you're not doing something about it, and you're a superstar in this league and you're a VP of the National Basketball Players Association, that's not fine. So it's a couple different layers to the issue. I don't even necessarily consider it an issue. Well, I mean, it's an issue depending on where players stand in the fight for getting more Black head coaches in this league. And if that is not an issue to them, then there's no issue with the Nash hire, right? But if it is an issue to them, then it's kind of like almost shooting yourself in the foot, saying you want more Black head coaches, but not using your power to get some in there.
Even though sports had a break, your business didn't. You have to keep moving, and that makes hiring more important than ever. Indeed is here to help. Indeed.com is the #1 job site in the world because Indeed gets you the best people fast. Unlike other sites, Indeed gives you full control and payment flexibility over your hiring. You only pay for what you need, you can pause your account at any time, and there are no long-term contracts. Plus, Indeed provides powerful tools to make your search that much easier, like sponsored jobs, which are shown to be 3.5 times more likely to result in a hire. With 73% of online job seekers visiting Indeed each month, Indeed is going to get you the important hire you need, just like they have for over 3 million businesses. Right now, Indeed is offering our listeners a free $75 credit to boost your job post, which means more quality candidates will see it fast. Try Indeed out with a free $75 credit at Indeed.com/BlueWire. This is their best offer available anywhere. Go right now to Indeed.com/BlueWire. Terms and conditions apply. Offer valid through December 31st. Yeah, and that was the thing. What you touched on is where my feelings had landed on it, is that it definitely matters that like, even if you haven't spoken to them directly, like, this isn't a decision that gets made without a hard stamp of approval from Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. And it definitely wouldn't be a stretch to say, knowing what Durant's relationship was with Steve Nash, even before he went to Golden State, like, Nash was kind of involved in that decision-making process. I think it would be fair to say, like, this was a coach that was handpicked by Kyrie and Kevin Durant. But so I think, when you're looking at this specific situation, when you have, if your two black superstars are then driving the hire, I think that makes it more okay. But then what you talk about, which just makes so much sense to me, and is again where I had landed on it, is that this is just a larger issue than just what's happening with the Nets, and then you're looking at the opportunity that Steve Nash is kind of coming into as a first-time head coach, where it's not just an issue of, they didn't hire someone of color, or you could say that he's replacing someone of color because Jacques Vaughn did a hell of a job there too. It's that he also skipped the line among any assistants that have done more time in their spot, and like you said, would have needed to, white or black, but predominantly black, would have needed to have taken over in most cases a worse team, and he's coming into this contender, and so that's where I think the discussion lies. Is we can say that, look, Kyrie and KD wanted Steve Nash, and look, that has to matter. That certainly matters, but it does, like, the whole perfect storm of circumstances here, I think, lends itself to the larger conversation. And then the thing that I didn't even really think about, which you bring up, is just a very salient point, is where do the players land on this? Because this is just one of those issues where I feel like they haven't necessarily spoken or been asked too much about it. And so if they do think that there's this, or if they're all about the clear hiring disparity when you're looking at head coaches and even front offices executives, if that matters to them, then yes, something like this, where Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are the driving force behind Steve Nash getting this job, might not be the best look. That's something, though, that I think they definitely need to talk more about, or actually be asked about. The thing in this specific situation is you just keep coming back to Kyrie and KD wanting him. Even Kyrie saying on that podcast you referenced that, do we even have a head coach? Like, he made it sound like it was more of a co-op. That's kind of funny to me. And whether he misspoke or not, I think it hints at the fact that, well, these two were clearly very involved, if not driving the process.
I get, and it all takes, these things that they can be kind of touchy, right? Because if you ask a player a question in the wrong way, they'll get defensive. Yep. And then they'll deflect it, and they won't even they won't even answer the question. Now they're looking at a certain reporter a certain way, like, okay, I know you've got some type of agenda. You know who I appreciate the way they ask questions? Taylor Rooks. Specifically when I was covering, I was covering just a little bit in the early rounds, especially when the Nets were playing they weren't playing the Magic in the playoffs, but they played the Magic, or something happened with the Magic. I don't think they played the Magic, but Jonathan Isaac didn't kneel for the national. No, it wasn't a playoff game, it was a seeding game. And what Taylor Rooks did was she didn't preface the question at all. She just said, "Hey, do you believe Black Lives Matter?" Right? And that's that's the question, or that's the way the question needs to be asked for these players. Is, do you think that there is an issue with because you can't frame the question as, hey, what do you think about, or did you consider the fact that, after you can't really attack players for not doing something, right? That's not necessarily how you have to approach it, but you can ask them a question, open-ended question, and then follow up on it, right? So my question to them will be, hey, do you feel like there is an issue with the number of black head coaches in this league? Then I'll have to follow up, did you guys consider that, right? Mm-hmm. Is that something that you guys considered when you were deciding whether Steve Nash was the guy for the job or not? So that's probably the way I'm going to do it. And I'm pretty sure nobody else is going to ask that question. I'm probably going to have to ask it the second time around because I've got other questions I got to get in as well. But it's going to be fun. I just hope it's something that we can do in person, because I'm really over the whole virtual thing. It's so robotic, man. You know how it is, man. They don't even see you. Like, they're looking at a screen of themselves. They don't even see you when you're asking the questions to them in Zoom. They block it out. So I can't wait for that to come around, because I'm genuinely curious. I really want to know if you do think that it's an issue, right? That there aren't enough black head coaches in this league, and you're willing to go to war. And obviously there's different levels of magnitude between black coaches and black people getting murdered by police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and in Ferguson, and wherever you wanna pick the example. But it just, NBA players showed how much power they have, right?
Right.
They were able to they were able to go down to Orlando. They were able to get people in Wisconsin on the phone talking about, hey, this is something that can't happen. The NBA basically caved to their players' requests. So why can't they use that same strength to put coaches of color in good jobs? And the only explanation is that they don't care as much, right? And
Right.
that's why I would have to ask, right? I say, do you actually, is this something that actually matters to you? If so, why haven't you shown it?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a great question. I look forward to you being able to ask it. Like you said, hopefully it's in person, but I have like a suspicious feeling that you might need to fast forward to like
Jeez.
2022 for that. For that.
Please don't. I can't do another 2020, man. I can't do it.
I hope it better. Can anything be worse than 2020? I honestly hope not, but I guess we'll have to wait and see there. Sort of the
2024 if 2020 doesn't end right.
That's a good and terrifying point at the same time.
Right.
The other, I think, level to this too is that there is when you move aside from the just sort of the morality of the Nash hire, if you want to call it that, is just you kind of already alluded to this, is the combustibility of the situation because he's coming in and forget about who the coach was. Like the Nets already kind of took one risk in my mind by letting Kenny Atkinson leave. And so now you're hiring a first-time head coach, and now you're doing it against this abridged title window because Kevin Durant, this is going to be year one back from his Achilles injury. Like there's a chance. I think he's going to recover fairly well relative to all the other Achilles injuries we've seen, but you could envision a scenario where he needs a season to become Kevin Durant again. And when he's 2 years out from free agency, when Irving's 2 years out from free agency already, like that just gives you a very abridged window to where you might not even be working with the best version of this team this year. And then by the time you are, then all of a sudden you're on this 1 year window before they have their player options. And so you're dealing with not just the expectations, but the expectations in this very condensed period of time.
Yeah, as it pertains to Kevin Durant, if you ask me, I think he was ready to play in March, April. I think he was ready to go. He's definitely playing 5-on-5s and not necessarily ready to play just solely because the Nets didn't have anything on the line, right? Like you're not putting Kevin Durant back on the floor in March, everything considered, because the Nets obviously aren't going anywhere. Kyrie Irving's hurt. This team has no chemistry. They're not going anywhere. If you put Kevin Durant on the floor, the worst thing that'll happen is he re-injures his Achilles. The best thing that happens is you guys make it to the playoffs, still the 7th seed, and you lose in the first round again, right? So I don't think it's ever worth it. But from what I was able to see, just hanging around and being at Nets practices and stuff, I think I told you this already, when he was just running up and down the court, catching footballs, he was shooting turnaround fadeaway jump shots in January. He's been as close to 100% for a while now. I think he's at the point where he's ready to go. I saw some pictures on Instagram today of him just getting some practice up, and he's out in Cali where he's practicing and rehabbing. So I think the rehab portion of his Achilles, and this is just me, making an educated guess from when I first saw Kevin Durant on the press conference and how he, the way he had to go up a small flight of stairs and the ginger way he came down a flight of stairs to the week after or the 2 weeks after that, where he couldn't get really that much elevation on any jumps. He wasn't jumping at all. He was shooting jumpers. He was shooting shots on his tippy toes. Right? They were set shots. To then watching his slow progression, and then in my mind thinking, okay, March is here. Now I'm thinking to myself in March, if the Nets are good enough, if Kyrie Irving is healthy, Kevin Durant can come back for the playoffs. That's what I was thinking in March. Mm-hmm. We're in October now, right? And I would assume that his rehab, has been at least somewhat consistent through the pandemic. And then as things started loosening up, this season isn't going to start until January at the earliest. My assumption would be Kevin Durant is 100% healthy and ready to go right now. I don't think that there's any concern in terms of, I think the re-aggravation risk for whenever he starts would be the same as the re-aggravation risk for whenever he starts, right? That'll be January, February, March, December, November. If he would have started in October, I would have thought, okay, well, it just to me, I don't know how much, and I could be wrong. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving any medical advice, right? But I don't think that there's much more for him to do in terms of getting his Achilles back to a place where it's ready to go. Because if you ask me, I think he was ready to go months ago. Now, I don't even know what the actual question was. What did you actually ask me?
Just the element of this now, like how it feels like much more combustible this situation is because you've
Oh
now,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And on top of that, you've got a lot of that. The combustibility lies in the injury proneness of the players, right? You've got Kevin Durant, who if he re-injures his Achilles, it's over, right?
yep,
You get lucky if you injure your Achilles. Once you injure it twice, it's game over. Kyrie Irving can't stay on the floor for an entire for a half season. He played 20 games this year. And his injury issues are well documented. Caris is another injury prone guy. He's been injured damn near every year in the NBA and in college. So if any one, two, or three of those pieces fall at any moment, now you're looking like, okay, well, what's going on? You know, I've seen people saying that we Nets might want to trade Caris for Victor Oladipo. Oladipo's another injury prone guy, so it is combustible. But at the same time, and this was another thing that kind of irked me about the Nash hire. You know, if you ask me, I don't think it matters who you would have hired in terms of you've got so much talent on that team. Those guys, like, yes, head coaches are responsible for championships, right? But at the end of the day, it's talent, right? Talent is going to be what goes out there and wins the games, right? Obviously, you've got to have a coach who's going to go out there and make you play defense. You got to have a coach that's going to go out there and put an offensive system out there and put guys in position to succeed, whatever you want to say it. But at the end of the day, if you don't have stars, you're not going to win the championship. Mm-hmm. Steve Nash got to inherit superstars. You have to inherit. I don't know where they rank on your list, but KD is easily a top 5, if not top 3, top 2 player in this NBA. Kyrie, depending on how you feel on him, is top 10, at least top 15 in this league, right? If you're getting 2 top 15 guys and then you have a deep roster, you're going to be able to make it work, right? It doesn't. You could put me out there, right? And I would say, no, no. I would tell Kyrie the same thing. I'm not a coach. I'm just here. You know what I'm saying? Let's just figure it out. There's no such thing as a coach. I'm just here to let you guys do your thing. So to that end, if not having a coach doesn't really, if a coach is just a figurehead, right? Like just like the person who runs the country, then what really it's semantics at a point, man. It's like what is happening. But to your point about the combustibility factor, I think it's going to be very important, and that's very important. Why they retain Jacques Vaughn, because Jacques Vaughn has that relationship with those guys. He actually formed that relationship. Imagine being promoted head coach on March 9th, and then 2 days later everything comes crashing down, and your responsibility is not only to your responsibility becomes less of a head coach and more of like a therapist, right? Because you've got to check in and touch base with all your guys, make sure they're okay, giving them things to do at home. That it was very important for the Nets to keep Jacques Vaughn just for that relationship factor. And I think we're going to learn more about the direction they're going to go based on how Steve Nash fills out his bench. He wanted to bring in Dirk, and Dirk said no, which obviously if he's going to be a coach anywhere, it'd be in Dallas. And then we're hearing he wants to bring in Mike D'Antoni, which would be interesting. And Phil Handy, which I don't think would happen, right? Because if I'm Phil Handy, I'm probably staying with the Lakers. I just want a ring. I'm going to run it back. But if you're trying to get Dirk and you're trying to get Mike D'Antoni, I don't see a defensive bone on that bench. So it'll be interesting. But I think to your point, the combustibility factor is there. I think it's more so there because of injury-prone players. I think that in terms of having options with the basketball, I don't think there's going to be any type of selfishness. I think those guys, they all understand that they want to win, and they have a very short window to really get it going. And a lot of guys don't want to leave. A lot of those guys don't want to get traded. Honestly, they want to stay. If you look at Spencer Dinwiddie's Twitter, every time there's a trade rumor involving the Nets, he knows if the Nets are going to trade for a significant piece, he knows, like, and he's not shy about talking about it. He knows that he's probably the guy to be dealt in that trade, him or Caris. So I think those guys are more so of the mindset that we're going to do whatever it takes to win. Whether that's me sitting myself in a corner and shooting threes, running back on defense, and moving that ball around, or whether it's me actually calling my own shot. Those guys, the Nets, it's more so for them, the little pieces. I don't think they need another superstar player. I think they need role players, and I'd assume we'll get into that at some point. But I don't necessarily see a combustibility factor in terms of egos. I think those guys are going to put it away and really try to compete for a championship. I do see a potential for a meltdown if we get one or more injuries. That would be bad.
Yeah, and that seems maybe more like a midseason thing, where like if they're also out to a slow start, like maybe that's where they hit like the nuclear button. And I think the ego thing is important. especially when you're looking at Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. I don't think this can ever be overestimated. These two are not only now on a team that they chose to play for, but they chose to play together. So, I think that takes care of any ego problems. The wait is finally over. Football is back. You might not be at a game this year, but you can still be in on the action at BetOnline. BetOnline is going the extra mile to make sure you can get in on every possible chance to win this season. From game spreads and totals to team, player, and coaching props, BetOnline gives you more options to wager on than anywhere else. You can get in on their season opening bonuses today and start off wagering on wins, division odds, and championship futures all day, every day. Head to BetOnline today and take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses. Don't forget to use promo code BlueWire, all one word, at betonline.ag. That's BlueWire, all one word. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. And as you mentioned, there's two layers to this question. Of one, do you see a pathway to where, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Caris LeVert, to them all fitting together? Because in theory, it can be done, except that for all four of them, I would argue off-ball shooting is the weaker part of their games, even though they can all do it. Caris LeVert specifically has not been this great off-ball shooter. And then there's also, while I would not trade Caris LeVert for Victor Oladipo, that's just something I wouldn't do right now because he's under contract. Oladipo's injury prone too and going to enter free agency. Oladipo might be is higher end, I would say, in the aggregate, but just looking at the contracts and the health history, LeVert seems like the better keep for, or has more value to the Nets. At the same time, when you're talking about the potential for missed games, there is sort of a validity to thinking that maybe you do need that third star to lift up those nights where you only have Durant or Irving rather than both of them. Because if you're the Nets, you have to sit back and say, how many games are those two going to play together? And, if that number is I would say 50 games with them playing together, not like a piece, but together might be on the more optimistic end. And so maybe you want someone else who's not Caris or Dinwiddie to do the heavy lifting on those nights.
Yeah, I was of that thought process before we saw an NBA Finals with two duos, right? We saw Jimmy Butler and Bam, and we saw LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And I understand that that's an imperfect comparison because, well, where were the Warriors, right? Where were the Nets with their just two stars? There were a lot of pieces. Where were the Clippers? Clippers got bounced, right? Because they had two stars. And when I think of the Nets as currently constructed, I think of them as the inverse Clippers, right? You look at the Clippers, you've got two stars, and then you've got a bunch of gritty two-way players, and the Clippers are supposed to have this incredible defense that just did not show up against the Nuggets. Mm-hmm. The Nets on the other side, you've got an offensive Clippers, right? You've got KD, you've got Kyrie, and then you've got a bunch of other guys on that roster. You probably got another four from Spencer, Caris, Joe, and if he's on, Torian can get you 20. You've got four other guys on that roster that can get you 20 points. So if you've got six guys, you got two guys who are capable of getting you 30 and another four who are capable of getting you 20, you've got a lights out offensive team. It's interesting. It's an interesting situation, especially when you consider Caris. I know for sure that Kevin Durant loves Caris LeVert and he wants to play with them, right? And for that reason, I don't think the Nets trade Caris unless it's going to get you back Bradley Beal, Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think it has to bring you back one of those two players, right? And I don't think the Nets are going to try to go after Giannis, even though I think they could put together a compelling package. I think it'd be pretty cool to see Kyrie, KD, and Giannis on the same team. That'd be pretty crazy. But I just don't see it happening. I see the Jrue Holiday trade chatter as well. And I think if they're going to get Jrue Holiday, they go after him and try to keep Caris. You can still put together a pretty decent package of revolving around Spencer, Jarrett Allen, Torian, and your picks. I think they could try to make that work. But to answer your question, well, let's try to put this roster. Let's try to put together the starting five, right? You got Caris. Well, no, you're not Caris. You got Kyrie at the 1, KD probably at the 3, Joe Harris at the 2, and then you're probably going to end up starting DeAndre Jordan at the 5. And you have to sign your 4, right? So your 4 is going to be probably Serge Ibaka, right? So that's your ideal. Maybe Serge Ibaka isn't ideal, but that's probably what you're starting the season with, right? Kyrie, Kyrie, Joe, KD, Serge, and DeAndre Jordan. Where do Spencer and Caris fit into that? They fit in off the bench, right? I think Steve Nash said something about Caris coming in a Manu Ginobili role. That sounds about right. When you compare the two games, you compare what Caris Manu wasn't necessarily the streakiest shooter, but he could hit shots when he was hot. He could create for other people. He had a little herky-jerky game as well. And when you look at Caris, that's what he's able to do. He's able to get other guys involved. He shot, I think, better from three this year than any other year. We saw what he was able to do in the bubble. And you could also put him on the floor out there with Kyrie and KD at the same time, and because you can always put KD to the floor. I think just that versatility that they have a bunch of different players that can play different positions, right? You can put Caris at the one, and if you have to, I know this might sound crazy, you can move Kyrie off the ball if you need to. You can move KD to the three. You can play around with that roster.
Give me KD at the five even, and play all five of them together with Joe Harris, and then just don't get a single stop. I'm not even being facetious. That's a lineup that absolutely needs to take the floor.
What's defense when you can score 100, what's that, 30, 60, 80, 20? When you score 140 points with six guys, what's defense, right? You don't need that.
No, you don't.
So, I think the Nets are in position to have, I think they can honestly have one of the best offenses we've seen in a while because, obviously the Rockets have this thing figured out. You're spacing out the floor. You've got James Harden. You've got shooters. You've got Clint Capella. They've always had one of the stronger offenses in the league, but the Nets have legitimately five guys that can go out there and get you 20 points. The Rockets don't have that. The Rockets have one guy who can get you 40 and a bunch of shooters and then another guy who might be able to get you 25 on any given night. Then the Nets are in position to really have one of the better offenses. And I might be jumping out on a limb here, but I think we can see them do something that we haven't seen done in a while. It just matters, and this goes to your point, whether Steve Nash is going to be the guy who's going to be able to organize them, put them all in their right places, get his rotations down. That's an area that Kitty Atkinson struggled. He always would leave guys in for too long. He was the type of person who would leave D'Angelo Russell on the bench in late games because he felt like Spencer Dinwiddie was doing a better job. I'll never forget that. He subbed D'Angelo Russell out at the end of the game because Spencer Dinwiddie was doing a better job guarding Bruce Brown on the Pistons. That was his explanation. Bruce Brown was getting off, and he subbed D'Angelo Russell out because Spencer Dinwiddie was doing a bit. It was mind-blowing. Either way, and Nets fans are smart, right? They're going to ask, okay, well, where's D'Angelo? Why isn't he subbing this guy? And that's neither here nor there. I think Steve Nash is going to be fine, but I do think he's going to have to figure out what players play well with each other. And honestly, he's going to have to figure out if there's too many cooks in the kitchen. At the end of the day, I think they're probably going to have to trade somebody. I'm not sure if they do it at the beginning of the season or if they do it closer toward the trade deadline when they see if this group of guys is working. But you've got two chefs, and everybody else needs to be an assistant. You need to have prep chefs. You need to be sous chefs. Not everyone can be a head chef, right? There's only room for two head chefs in Brooklyn, and if somebody else wants to cook more, they might have to cook up elsewhere, and that's something that that's going to figure out this offseason and closer to the trade deadline as well.
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to make it work would be, you kind of outlined it when you were talking about their starting five, is if you can stagger their minutes that effectively, which I think becomes easier if both Dinwiddie and Caris LeVert are coming off the bench. In terms of playing them all together, I think the keys become, because you have four guys who can just break down defenses from these set positions, does it almost increase the off-ball value of everyone around them, because the looks that they're going to be getting is so high quality that even if it's not, catching and shooting is not the strongest part of Caris LeVert's game. And I think he was under 32% on catch and shoot threes this year. But the fact that he'll have so much space and time and just the ability to get himself even more set, maybe that makes it easier. And that's kind of it's not the Rockets model to a T, because they don't have that many guys who can break down the defense, but it's let James Harden just sort of destroy everything in front of him and send defenses like into anarchy, or just the state of clumsy clutter, if you want to call it. And then you're just going to be so open that even if that's not your game, if you're a viable half-decent shooter, that it's going to work out. I think what the bigger concern would be, if you want all four of these to work in the rotation, you're at a point where you're going to have you're 2 to 3 of them on the floor at all points. And that's not going to be, I don't know what Kevin Durant's going to look like defensively after his injury, but that needs to be the bigger focus to me on this team, even more so than saying, if you can obviously get a star who's also a great defender, yeah, that makes sense. Victor Oladipo is better than a LeVert or Dinwiddie in that area, but again, it's not someone that I'm looking at as an all-NBA defender. And so can they is it a matter of breaking up, the four of them, but only trading one of them, where it's a Dinwiddie where you can go out and get use him to anchor a package for an Aaron Gordon, just someone to lock down the four? Because you mentioned Ibaka, I think that would be, he's someone that could fit with them, but when you're working with such a small mid-level exception, I don't know that you're going to get the answer in free agency. And so maybe that's where the value lies for them on the trade market. Is you want to keep LeVert, so you're probably not going to get that third or fourth star, whatever you consider LeVert, and that's fine because maybe you can use, I don't necessarily, Dinwiddie's a great player for them, and I think he's just important to the tenor and personality of that locker room. But if you can use him to upgrade your frontline defense, particularly when you don't really know what Kevin Durant's going to look like, when Taurean Prince is just not really built for that type of role, that might be the key to kind of tying this whole thing together, where you look at this roster and say, okay, at least 3 of these guys can play together without issue.
Yeah, you made a good point. The player that they need is not going to be available, for their budget in free agency. If Jerami Grant declines his option and becomes a free agent in Denver, that'd be a guy that I would say, okay, they need him at the 4. Or, another guy that I really like who they're not going to be able to get because they're not going to get him from Dallas, Dorian Finney-Smith would be a great get to put right at that 4 for the Nets. Guys like that, guys that can go out there. JaMychal Green, if he's going to leave the Clippers, I think he has an option that he's about to turn down. If they can get somebody like him, they need somebody at that 4 who doesn't necessarily want the ball all the time, can shoot an open 3, likes to move the ball around, and can defend 5, 4, 3, 2, and even 1. Right? If you can defend all those positions, that's the type of guy you need. And that's the position they've been in. That's the position they've been in for a while. They had the same issue last year when they were playing Jared Dudley and DeMarre Carroll significant minutes at the 4, and neither of them were doing a good job. They thought Rodion Kurucs was going to be the answer this year, and he played decent in stretches, but he's still a young player, has a lot to learn. He also has that DV charge that he's got to figure that out. That's kind of been put on the back burner. Some of the guys haven't really been talking about recently, but he's still got a court case he's got to handle. And now you don't have that much cap space. You thought Taurean Prince was going to be the answer. He wasn't, unfortunately. It just didn't on either side. He didn't defend particularly well. He didn't shoot the ball particularly well either. That's why I think he's going to be one of the first players out the door in a trade. And other than that, you had Wilson Chandler. Wilson Chandler missed 25 games because he failed the drug test at the beginning of the year, came in, couldn't hit a shot consistently. It's just the 4 has been an issue for the Nets for the last 2-3 years now, and that's an area they need to address. So I think they're going to be creative. I think they're going to try to. Honestly, I think they're going to try to trade for that 3rd star. I'd like to see them get Bradley Beal. I think that's the only guy that you really, not necessarily blow it up, but that's the only guy that you deal all your young players. Unless you're going to get Giannis. If not, I think you can get Jrue for lower than it would cost to get some of these other guys, especially depending on what his interest is around. And I think Jrue, correct me if I'm wrong, Drew's going to be a free agent next year, or is it the year after that? Is he a free agent next year?
$27.3 million player option. That's like one of those where it's like, I could see him turning it down, but maybe he opts in and extends, or maybe he just opts in. But he's free agency. He's slated for it, in 2021 or 2022 as of now.
Yeah, I think that's a guy I could see them trying to go after, because if you've got someone who can defend every one, and now Kyrie doesn't need to play defense on any ones, and then on top of that, Jrue doesn't necessarily care about how much energy he's expending on defense because he's used to it, and he can still get buckets on offense. Oh my, Bitcoin is going crazy right now. It's up to, what's that, $12,788. Well, it was just at 13. This is crazy. The world we're living in is remarkable.
Spencer Dinwiddie's looking at that Bitcoin.
He is, and so am I. I just think that the Nets have to figure out what their priorities are. I think priority number 1 has to be getting that 4 that they need, because it's not on the roster. The person that they need at that 4, if you put a gun to my head and said start somebody at the 4, I'm probably it's game over for me, because there's no one on the roster to put there right now. But I think that's where they're going to go first, and then second. I'm not sure if Aaron Gordon is that guy for them either. Maybe he is. I haven't watched enough Aaron Gordon defensively to know what his capabilities are, if he can even guard 1s and 2s like that. But they're gonna try to do something, and they're also gonna try to. I think they're gonna try to improve that backcourt, and they've got to re-sign Joe, and then that's gonna be a tax-paying team, man. I think they know that.
Right.
And one scenario I saw was they're gonna try to trade for both Jrue and JJ Redick, which would be amazing if they could pull that off. I'm just not sure how they'll swing that. That would definitely cost them Caris and Spencer. It would cost them a couple pieces and players. But the Nets are in the driver's seat, man. They've got so many assets and so many young players. I think they can pull off a lot of different trades. So I'm interested to see what they do, and hopefully I can figure out what they do before you.
I think, and look, at free agency, there's a chance, because one of the legs up that teams have this year in free agency is if you are willing to spend following all the revenue that was lost mid this pandemic, like that gives you an edge. So even having the mini MLE, like maybe it gets you a player that it normally wouldn't. And so they could
Right.
be looking at it could be someone like a Markieff Morris, who's not necessarily a bad fit, but maybe you can get a Mo Harkless or a Paul Millsap. Like those are two guys that would be
Right.
fantastic fits for what they're trying to do. The Jrue Holiday and JJ Redick theory is interesting because I still wouldn't give up both Caris and Dinwiddie in that scenario. Just because both of those guys, you already mentioned it, they're going to be free agents. But I do agree that if you're going to go for that third star, and Beal, we're assuming, is off the table because he doesn't want to leave Washington, and Washington doesn't want to move him right now. Jrue Holiday just
Right.
seems like the perfect one to go after. That still leaves you with some front court defensive issues, but he's so good, and he's going to give you defense across positions one through three, and then there's another guy who can break down the defense for you. I'm still just very interested to see what they wind up doing at the four because Taurean Prince cannot be, I don't even know if he could be the short-term answer at this point. And that extension, that 2-year deal, I know they were looking at it as, this is like a good salary anchor for a trade, but that decision looks questionable at best at this point.
Yeah, I mean, he pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. He came in first day training camp, said, "Hey, I'm going to take the challenge as the defensive stopper on this team. I'm going to do my job and space the floor out. I'm going to do what it takes to win." And he tried, but talk is cheap. You got to go out there and it's tough for me to say he didn't try defensively, right? Because I'm not going to go out there and say he didn't actually try to make defensive plays. He did. He just didn't try consistently enough, right? And that's just his issue this year was consistency. He'd have some games where he got hot from three, and then he'd go 0 of 16 over the next. Well, not 0 of 16. 0 of 16 is dragging it, right? He'd probably go 2 for 9 over the next 3 games, including one game with no threes made. His shot selection at times was pretty questionable. He's a guy who shoots sidestep and step back threes. It's kind of ridiculous. He post up, shoots turnaround fadeaway jumpers. I was just like, yo, you're a stretch four. You're supposed to sit there and shoot open threes and make them and play defense. And he just didn't do either of those things consistently enough. But I can't keep bragging on the guy, right? I've made that point many times. The 4 is obviously something they need to take care of. And the contract, yeah, I mean, it's a team-friendly contract, right? They're going to be able to trade it. But I do think the jury's out, right? I think people know now, okay, to what Taurean Prince is, who he is in this league. And I don't think people are going to be jumping at taking him, right? I'm not sure if there's a team that's going to be, oh, Taurean Prince is available, let's go get him. Let's give up something to go get him, right? Like, it's not going to be that adding him to a contract is not going to help your cause, right? Or adding him to a trade is not going to help your cause. So it'll be interesting to see how, if they're able to, I'm sure they'll be able to move him as a cap filler, but you're going to have to attach a pick or something to that because I'm not sure what value he brings if he's not defending at a high level and he's not consistently hitting threes anymore.
Yeah, I think you hit it. He helps him with the salary matching where it's like if you attach him to another salary, like you can take back a more expensive player while including other stuff alongside him. The looking at players that are actually on this team, though, do you have any feel for how you think the Nets really view Jarrett Allen moving forward? I think he is better for them than DeAndre Jordan, but it's very clear how high on the pecking order DeAndre Jordan is. And now all of a sudden you're at this point where Allen is extension eligible. Is he someone that you envision them extending? You envision them letting it reach restricted free agency? Or do you think that he's just not going to finish next year with the team, even if he begins it with them?
That's a great. I think it depends on I think. So if the Nets are going to trade for a third star, Jarrett Allen is going to be part of that deal, right? Just because you're probably going to put Caris in there, depending on who you're going to get, and depending on the team. Jarrett Allen, he's a starting center in this league. He proved that in the Orlando bubble. He proved that before DeAndre Jordan came. He can play. He's a guy who's going to protect the rim, and he's a guy who's going to run. He's a guy who's going to finish dunks. The issue with that is that there will always be another Jarrett Allen, right? There's nothing special about him, unfortunately. The most special thing about him is his pro, and the fact that he plays video games pretty cool. He's a great guy, great dude, but
there was that moment in time where it looked like he was going to be a 3-point shooter, and then all of a sudden, that just stopped.
He shot one. I remember he was practicing a little bit, and Kenny Atkins was like, "Hey, we're gonna need you to start shooting threes." That ship has sailed. And it's fine. Jarrett Allen he's a very fine center, right? He's going to be a rim running and rim protecting big man. He'll probably get a contract, probably somewhere in the 4 year, $40-something million extension at some point, or maybe a little more than that. However, they're going to do it wherever he ends up. But you will always be able to find a tall player who can run, jump, and dunk. Right? It's unfortunately that's what they have in DeAndre Jordan. They have an older version of Jarrett Allen. Right? I don't see any difference between the two, except one has been in the league for however long DeAndre Jordan has, and the other has been in the league for 3 years, going on 4. So I think that's the situation. And then what complicated is that the Nets went ahead and drafted Nick Claxton last year, and I think Nick Claxton is a 5. Right? I mean, I don't think there's any benefit in playing him at the 4. I think he's a 5 in this league. So he's been in this tweener situation ever since then. He got demoted for a guy who, honestly, in my opinion, he's better than, except for the fact that DeAndre Jordan, his underrated ability is being able to pass that ball. He can do that. I didn't have a great appreciation for how he was able to pass the ball until he came to Brooklyn. Then he started and then he started getting some significant playing time. He kind of likes to operate out of that Al Horford high elbow area, and he'll just like make passes out of there. He calls it the hub. He makes passes out of the hub. It's really cool.
I think that year he spent, I think it was a year without Chris Paul, is like where that really started honing in for him, is because he's always been kind of able to make those like quick passes on the move, but where you're talking about his set playmaking, that felt like, I'm not necessarily sure he needed that, but like when Chris Paul was gone that year, and then they traded Blake Griffin, I believe, too, the season after Paul left, like that really opened the door for him to experiment with that.
Yeah, number one, DeAndre Jordan is the most fun player on that roster. I have a ball with him anytime he's around. We ask him about the passing, and he always says, I'm telling you guys, they just got to give me the ball, put the ball in my hand. That's what he says every time. And he's so serious, but it's real. Like, he can actually make plays, and that's the area that Jarrett Allen hasn't. Like, he's had games in the bubble where he was able to operate and make he had some actually pretty good passing games in the bubble, but that was the first we've seen of him being able to do that, right? DeAndre Jordan has proven to be able to make those passes this entire year. So I think that's the next step for Jarrett Allen. But it boils down to, you will always be able to find the player that can do what Jarrett Allen does, right? How many other rim protecting, rim running 7-footers are there in this league? There's probably one on every roster, right? It's just more so opportunity and organization's patience in developing their players. So for that reason, I think Jarrett Allen is probably going to get traded. Because number one, you're not trading DeAndre Jordan. He's going to be here as long as Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are. And I just don't think it's feasible for those two to be splitting 48 minutes. I don't think it's going to work that way. I mean, it could. In theory, probably it could work that way.
I think you're right.
But that extension is coming up.
Yeah,
right?
And that's what it is. It's like you're paying DeAndre $10 million a year, basically, and then once Allen's at that level, like you're then paying $20+ million for what combines to be a non-superstar center. That becomes problematic.
Yeah. I don't care how close he is with Kyrie or KD. It just the number is bad, right? 4 years, $40 million for a guy who's getting older, and I mean, Father Time is undefeated.
That 4th year is a killer. That's the one that got me.
Yeah,
I was like 4.
Yeah, it's bad. But I mean, and there's no but, right? He's only going to get older. He's only going to get less athletic, less agile. He's only going to be less effective at guarding 1s and 2s. He's only become more of a liability on the floor over the next few years. And that's just the unfortunate fact about anybody who gets older, right? Like any player except for LeBron, right? LeBron is the only player I've seen who is actually whooping Father Time's ass right now, because that man doesn't stop. But everybody else, the older you get, the less effective you are in a bunch of different areas. And I think that it was a mistake, but it's a mistake you have to make if it means bringing Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving on, right? Like, okay, I'll give DeAndre Jordan $10 million. We'll just have to go draft another young, fun center who can fill in the minutes that DeAndre Jordan doesn't play. And that's what it's going to boil down. DeAndre Jordan is going to be the most compensated role player ever. He's going to be great.
Yeah, and I'm with you mostly on the Allen stuff. I think he when you watch him, it feels like he has more switch to him than a lot of players of his archetype on defense. But it also felt like that wasn't there as much this past season for whatever reason. And so whenever you invest in those guys, it's a risk. But long term, he's clearly the better fit for Brooklyn. But I'm not going to say shocked. But it would be mildly surprising to me if he's on the team beyond the trade deadline. Not even necessarily because his value's high, but like, if you pair him with a set, like he's another asset to put in either a bigger deal, or if you attach him to Taurean Prince's salary, like does that just get you somebody? Is it, or even is it like a mildly big deal where it's Allen a first and Taurean Prince's salary? I'm like names I'd be blanking on here, but like,
Right.
if the Rockets are pivoting out of small ball, like does that package get you, does Prince and Allen in a first get you Robert Covington?
That would be ideal.
That's
That
off
is
the
an
top of my
ideal
head, and I would
trade,
assume they'd
yeah.
say no, but I'm just like, you could do something like that, and I assume that they eventually will do something along those lines if he's not part of the bigger deal. One of the other guys who's already there that I'm surprised we really haven't mentioned him much already is, so Joe Harris is a free agent, and
Yeah.
I think because of what he does, like he's shown he can attack closeouts. I also think that he's like kind of an underrated passer when he's on the move. But for the shots he takes just off the catch in motion, like he's mission critical to providing offensive balance when you have all these other ball handlers around him. And I think he's
For sure
probably one of the free agents, if you want to say between 5 and 7, that are going to get like actual massive money this summer. And so do you think that there's always a breaking point, but do you think, like, I could see in Atlanta or a New York being like, hey, Joe Harris, here's $13-14 million a year. Do the Nets have to match that, and will they?
Yeah, they're going to pay Joe Harris. I think that they've got to make sure he knows he's wanted, and he knows he's wanted, right? This is a guy who can go out there and shoot it. And it's not just shooting, right? Like this year in the bubble, even before the bubble, we're seeing him take guys off the dribble, finish at the rim. We're seeing him take guys off the dribble, make the extra pass. We're seeing him defend. This is less of Joe Harris. Joe Harris is closer to Klay Thompson than he was himself now as a rookie, right? I think he's closer to Klay Thompson than he is who he was when he entered the league, right? Because now he's not just a guy who come out and hit threes. He's a guy who can do a little bit of everything. That said, there's a guy who's going to command that type of money. I think the Atlanta scenario is real, right? Because the Hawks can use that type of player. But I don't think the Nets let him leave, bro. I don't even think the Nets let him pick up the phone to hear other offers. I think they get that handed pretty quickly. I mean, Sean Marks came out and said, and Sean Marks is a guy who says absolutely nothing, right? He will not tell you a single thing. For him to come out and say, hey, Joe Harris is priority number one, I believe him. Now, if he turns around and does not sign Joe Harris, I'm like, okay, something's up here. But nah, I can't see he's just like you said it. He's so critical to how this team functions, and the team doesn't have anybody else like him. He's the best. Not only he's not just the best shooter on the team, he's one of the best shooters in the NBA. He's also going to go out there and guard. He's also going to go out there and just the threat of him. He kind of has the Duncan Robinson effect, right? Just the threat of him shooting out on the 3-point line is even more of a threat than him actually taking the shot. Guys are literally fearful of him coming off of the screen and hitting a shot, so they're going to jump out at him. And he has that type of impact in Brooklyn as well. So I don't think the Nets let him go. The Nets. You remember how the Clippers locked DeAndre Jordan in his own house? I think we're gonna see a little bit of that. I don't think Joe's gonna go anywhere.
And what would be what's the most undercovered or underrepresented thing about this team right now going into next season that most intrigues you? Like, everyone's talking about Joe Harris or Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant. What is it about this team that's not receiving enough discussion on?
That's a great question, man. I don't think people are actually paying attention to the Nets as a legitimate championship contender. Right. And that's part of the thing that gets me excited. Right. And part of this is self-serving. Right. There would be nothing more fulfilling for me to cover than an actual championship team here in my hometown in Brooklyn. Right. Number one, I've never covered a good team as a reporter in my years here. Right. I've been in New York covering the NBA as a reporter since 2015. So I've had 2015, 16, 17 Knicks, and then I've had the Nets over the last couple of years. But when you look at this roster and you look at what Kyrie Irving has done in his career, what Kevin Durant has done in his career, and you look at the rest of the East, this team is actually one that can legitimately contend for not just the Eastern crown, but they could potentially win it all if everything goes right. You've got Kevin Durant, who proved he can beat LeBron, right? Kevin Durant has beaten LeBron 2 years in a row. And obviously he was part of a monster Warriors team, but he was the best player on that team. And he stepped up and hit shots, right? He stepped up and hit shots in LeBron's face for the win 2 years in a row, I believe. So it's not like this is all. Oh, it's not like it's hypothetical. We've seen him do this, and we've seen Kyrie hit shots in crunch time. We've seen him hit the shot over Steph. We watched him hit the shot over Clay on Christmas Day the next year. Like, we know what he's done and what he's capable of. I think there should be more stock in the Nets as potential championship, like actual. Like, I think there should be more bets on the Nets. I think people should bet on them because this is a team where if everything goes right, it is a big disclaimer. But if things go, if the ship just stays straight and doesn't get any holes in it, they're at least going to be top 4 team in the East, right? I don't think you could name 5 teams that'll have a better record than the Nets if Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are healthy, right? We could try Bucks, Raptors, not the Sixers. I don't think the Heat have a better record. Maybe the Celtics, maybe the Raptors. I don't think those teams.
I think you could go 3. I think you could say pretty solidly if the Nets are semi-healthy, they'll be top 5 in the East, if not top 4.
Yeah, easily. And then from there, it's playoffs. And if you look at the East, I'm not sure if there are any 2 other players you'd rather have on your team in crunch time in the playoffs than Kyrie and KD. Can you name one? Maybe Jimmy Butler, based on what he was able to do. But other than that, based on what I saw this year, I wouldn't want Giannis on my team in crunch time in the playoffs. He's easily defendable, and the Bucks are not a complete team. Kemba, in my opinion, he was exposed. Love Kemba, but he's got to step up, right? Jason Tatum also has to step up. No one on the Sixers. There's no one on the Sixers I want over KD and Kyrie in crunch time. Maybe Jimmy Butler, but we still don't know if this was a one-off from Jimmy Butler, if he can do this every year. The Nets have 2 guys who are proven whatever assassins in the playoffs, right? So it's tough, man. I think there's that, and then there's just like how much fun are these guys going to have, right? I think when you've got a team with so much talent, it's just like, I think you talk about the combustibility factor. There's only one basketball can all these guys get involved with. B, if and we're trained not to go, okay, if everything goes right, because things rarely do go right. But if you just allow your mind to wander, what if things actually are perfect in Brooklyn for once? This could be a team that wins 60 games, 55, 60 games, and that would be that would be crazy. And then there's also the comparison to the team across the bridge. The Knicks are still crazy. They're probably going to end up trying to trade for Chris Paul, and whatever else is going to happen over there. And the real underrated thing is, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more traction for Nets basketball. Right, the Nets have always been in the Knicks' shadow, but now we're in an era where the Yankees just got bumped. The Mets aren't very good. The Jets stink. The Giants stink a little bit less than the Jets. The Jets are that just got me.
New York football is depressing. We can leave it at that. New York sports,
New York sports is in a bad place. Yeah, and the Nets are one of the only teams in New York sports that have a legitimate chance to win it all next year and the year after that. I think that's something people aren't talking about. And yeah, that's my little spiel.
I think I might even count myself among them looking at next season, where I just don't know that I necessarily consider them one of the foremost contenders. They have that range of outcomes for me. I just honestly don't know what to expect from year one Kevin Durant, because you talk about the crunch time playoff stuff, and I agree with everything you said. I would say maybe Kyrie is comes closer to being approximated if you look at what Jimmy Butler or Kemba without knee problems could do. But Kevin Durant is the epitome of crunch time, just can't unguardable. Just being you give it to Kevin Durant, he'll shoot over the top of everybody if it has to be that simple. It doesn't need to be anything complicated. He'll walk it up the floor and he can fire over anyone. And so having him is such a huge advantage. I've gotten caught on both sides of the spectrum where I'm too optimistic after a serious injury, and that's what I was with Gordon Hayward, or then where you're not optimistic enough. And I fell into that trap with Rudy Gay, where I just really kind of thought that he's done, and he came back from a similar injury and played quite well. The type of player Kevin Durant is, as you mentioned before, I would have had him as top 3 easily. I just don't know where he is now, and even how much of a glimpse of what he actually is we'll see during the regular season, because you have to imagine that the Nets are going to strive to conserve him for the postseason for those moments that you just described. And I think for me personally, that's why I'm so hesitant to render any sort of verdict on the Nets, because I could see them coming out of the East, but I'm also very reticent to be you know what, this is a 50-win team that's going to have a top 3 record as well.
Yeah, it like you said earlier, it only takes one of those dominoes to fall, whether it's Kyrie's shoulder or Kevin's leg or Caris's thumb or Spencer's Bitcoin wallet. It only takes one of those dominoes to fall, and then this team could be in free fall. But I honestly, and free fall is a stretch, right? Because even if Kyrie goes down for 15 games, you still have Spencer Dinwiddie, you still have Caris LeVert, and you still have Kevin Durant, right?
Mhm.
And if for some reason both of those guys go down for an extended period of time, you still have Caris and Spencer and Joe and a couple other guys, and who knows? And that depends on whether you trade or not. I think you said it best. There's such a wide range of outcomes for this team. And this probably is probably the homer in me, right? I've never seen a successful New York basketball season in my lifetime that didn't include, let's see, Carmelo Anthony, or let's see, was it? I think Latrell Sprewell was around when the Knicks were
99,
good one year
Latrell,
when I
Allen
was young.
Houston.
Yeah, I
About
was 7 at that point, right? So I was born in '92. I was 7 at that point. And anything before that, I wasn't necessarily coherent enough to understand what was happening. So I've only seen good New York basketball 2 periods of my life. Once, and then there's the third time when Darren Williams was there with the Nets, and they were semi okay, right? So
they
the
were
homer, the,
I love that that's
they
the
were,
state of New York
yeah,
basketball. They were semi okay.
yeah, that's basically how you can put it, right? New York basketball has been semi okay at best for the last 2 decades or so, right? Wow, it's been 2 decades and we haven't seen more than a second round appearance from either of these teams. Either way, I think that New York deserves something, right? New York deserves it's one of its sports teams to be good and actually win, right? And what it would do for this city would be amazing. The Yankees haven't won anything since '09. The the Knicks haven't won anything since what, '73.
Yep.
The Nets made it to the finals not too long ago, but they were, well, not too long ago as well. So
God,
that was
those
'01 or
teams,
so.
Vince Carter, Richard, those were fun teams.
Yeah,
I enjoyed
but
those
that
Nets
wasn't
teams.
even New York. That was New Jersey, right?
Yep,
So
that's a good point.
New Yorkers can't really claim that. The Jets have sucked for so. Think about this: the best the Jets have been in this decade was the Mark Sanchez era. That was the
Wow.
best. That might have even been this decade. That might have been last decade. No, I think that was this decade. The best the Jets have been in recent memory has been the Mark Sanchez era. That's how bad it's been. The Giants have been okay, right? The Giants are probably the gold standard. They've won a couple Super Bowls, but they
Yeah, but
suck
then they
now.
suck if
But
they don't win a Super Bowl. That's basically how it is.
yeah, exactly. But even though they suck right now, there's still some hope, right? Like, okay, well, you've got Daniel Jones, you've got Saquon Barkley. He's hurt, but at least there's some semblance. There's still a feeling of okay, this will be okay as it pertains to the Giants. You don't have that feeling about the Jets. I'm a Jets fan. The Jets suck.
Well, that's
Everything
what the
about them.
Giants have going
Adam
for them
Gase.
is they're not the Jets, I think. That's why their outlook seems better.
Exactly, and that's, oh my goodness. I could go on a rant right now about the Jets, but they're literally the worst team. They hired the worst head coach in NFL history. They're the worst team in the NFL, and that says something because the Cowboys have the worst defense in NFL history right now. So how you can be better than the team with the worst defense and then, well, worse than I'm not even going to go into that. Either way, I think that the Nets have a chance to actually bring some hope back to New York, right? And the bar is set so low, they don't have to win a championship this year. They have to make the playoffs and really make the Eastern Conference Finals, right? That's what you want them to do. And then next year, go get whatever pieces it is that you need for that. But they can really do something, man. I'm excited.
The very last thing I'll ask you is just looking at everything they have, like including even the number 19 pick. If they're gonna make a move,
Oh, that pick is gone.
yeah,
That
well,
that that pick, they never. I think. Well, how does it work? They have to actually make the pick before they trade it, right? So they're going to make the pick on behalf of another team, and then the trade will get cleared. That pick is gone already in the back of their minds. That pick is getting attached to
so,
whatever trade they're making. I can't see them keeping it. It wouldn't make sense.
yeah. So that was my question: is whether you think there's a chance that whatever move they make, however large, or I would say even the smallest move they make will be moderate, just looking at the assets they have to offer. You think it's going to happen before the season, or do you think there's a chance that this spills into the trade deadline where the Nets, they use their MLE, but then they stand relatively pat otherwise and don't necessarily make a move until they have a better feel for what this team looks like?
That's a good question. I think it depends on who they get, right? Like if you're going after a large target, if you're going after a Jrue, or if you're going after a Beal, or you're going after a Levine, then you're gonna know on draft day, okay, if we're going to get Levine, that pick is gone, right? Or we're attaching all the we're getting if we're going to get Beal, all these players are gone and these picks are gone. If you're going for smaller pieces, right? Like if you go through the season and you realize, okay, Kyrie's shoulder isn't that great, and Spencer is playing a lot of minutes, but we really don't have a backup point guard. Kristian went ahead and signed elsewhere. We've got to go trade for a backup. Then you might have a second trade elsewhere, right? You might have a second trade close to the deadline with whatever other pieces you have. So I think it more so depends on whether they clear everything out at the trade deadline and getting another star, or whether there might be a chance. I mean, that's a good question. I didn't really think about it like that. There might be a chance that some of this spills over to the trade deadline, but that's interesting because there's also a train of thought where it's like, yo, this team as currently constructed can go for it, right? They're deep,
right?
They need one extra piece. That piece would be a 4, right? And ideally, you want to trade Torian because once you go get that 4, there's no real room or role for him, right? Because you're playing KD most of the minutes at the 3. You're gonna have Caris and Spencer and Joe and Garrett Temple is gonna be playing more minutes than Torian. If you want to put Torian in at your backup 4, you know what you're gonna get out of that. So it's an interesting scenario there. But I don't know. I guess if I was a betting man, I'd say the Nets would get a lot of their business done ahead of time because that's something that you don't want that I wouldn't necessarily call it tension, but you don't want that dark cloud hovering over a team's head throughout the season. Oh, who's going to be here? Who's not? So I would bet that a lot of this stuff gets done at the trade deadline. I mean, at the on draft day, really, or during the off season. But you know, you might think it's done, and then something's not working out, and you need to make a little change here or there at the trade deadline. So we might see them do something bigger in the summer. Well, it's not even this crazy. It's not even the summer. Something bigger during the offseason, and then a smaller subsequent trade around the trade deadline. But I would bet they try to get a lot of their work done as early as possible.
I tend to agree with you, but they are among the most interesting teams this offseason for me because of, we talked about the range of outcomes for next season, but the range of things that can happen for them before next season are just absolutely through the roof. Because while we did speak on the level of combustibility, they have, I wouldn't say it's quietly, but like you don't really mention them among the teams that have the most aggressive trade packages if they go all in, and yet they do, just because of thanks to LeVert and Dinwiddie and Allen, number 19. And even their, I know both you and I know front offices don't always think like this because their job security doesn't necessarily span that long. But like if you're a team and the Nets are offering like a distant first round pick, like if it's 2023 or 2024, where like maybe Kyrie and KD isn't there, you might want that. So there's a lot of things they could do, and I'm very interested to see what they wind up actually doing over the offseason. Kristian, as always, thank you so much for letting me talk your ear off for over an hour. This was fun, as always. And you could be rest assured that I'm going to pester you again in the not-so-distant future.
Literally anytime, man. I'm glad we were able to chop it up. Hopefully next time we're talking, maybe it's at an arena if I'm traveling with the Nets, or maybe it's actually somewhere in person because I can't do any more of this virtual stuff, man. It's weighing on me.
Yes, we will definitely have to speak in person at some point. I think I remember seeing you a few times when I was covering the Nets, but we have never actually spoken in person, and it certainly did not happen. Yeah, you were. Look, I'll say that about you. I remember, I think you were at SB Nation at the time, and I was doing a lot of Net stuff for Bleacher Report back in the days where the Nets were guarding like Isaiah Whitehead's health like it was a state secret.
Sure.
Like those days. Yeah. And I just remember seeing you Zoom from locker room to locker room during postgame and thinking, I was like, that guy's like really working. I saw the pieces you were publishing clearly on deadline, and I was writing like longer features, so I didn't have these deadlines. And so I just remember seeing you, and I was like, that dude is a worker. So that was my impression before ever actually speaking to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. You know the hustle, man. You got to these players. You have a short window of time to get them, and after that they're gone. So you got to hustle from one locker room to the other and pray you didn't miss anybody. But I appreciate that, man. Next time, hopefully, when the streets reopen, we'll definitely we'll grab a drink or something, man, for sure.
Definitely. I'll talk to you soon, Kristian. Take care.
My God, thanks for having me.